Have you ever watched a bright child become convinced they're stupid because the wrong teaching methods made learning feel like punishment? What you're about to discover will change how you think about education, learning disabilities, and the power of finding the right approach for each unique mind. Contrary to what most people believe, it wasn't the $200 per hour Harvard-educated private tutors, the $50,000 specialized learning programs, or the cutting-edge educational technology that helped 8-year-old Marcus fall in love with learning. It was something far simpler and far more powerful. I've researched hundreds of cases involving children labeled as learning disabled or impossible to teach. And this story reveals something profound about how we completely misunderstand what makes learning magical. By the end of this story, you'll understand why the most important thing we can give a struggling child isn't expensive tutoring or advanced technology, but someone who believes in their unique way of seeing the world and meets them exactly where they are. Marcus went from being labeled impossible by 3 elite tutors to reading above grade level and asking for just one more chapter every night, proving that the right person with the right heart can unlock any child's potential. If you skip this story, you'll miss the moment that shows why understanding a child's spirit matters more than their test scores and how that understanding can transform everything. The expensive leather chair in Michael Patterson's Manhattan office creaked as he leaned back, staring at another failed report card. 3 F's, 2 D's, and a note from the teacher that made his stomach turn. Marcus continues to disrupt class and shows no improvement despite extensive interventions. 2 years ago, Michael had been one of Wall Street's most successful investment bankers, a billionaire who could solve any problem with enough money and determination. 2 years ago, his wife Elena had been alive, handling everything that made their house a home, especially their bright, curious little boy, who asked endless questions about everything he saw. Then came the car accident, the drunk driver, the funeral where 8-year-old Marcus had asked over and over, "When is mommy coming home?" Now Marcus was failing every subject at Manhattan's most elite private academy, despite obviously being intelligent. The boy who used to build elaborate Lego cities and explain their complex transportation systems couldn't seem to grasp basic math. The child who once made up detailed stories about his toy dinosaurs now read at a kindergarten level. Marcus has severe learning disabilities, the school psychologist had declared after extensive testing, coupled with behavioral problems that suggest ADHD. He's simply not equipped for academic rigor. Michael watched his son struggle through homework every evening, the sessions ending in tears and frustration that broke both their hearts. Marcus would stare at simple math problems as if they were written in a foreign language, his little hands shaking as he tried to form letters that seemed to swim on the page. "My brain doesn't work right, Daddy," Marcus had whispered one night after another failed homework session. "All the other kids are smarter than me." The confidence that had once defined his son was crumbling. Marcus, who used to eagerly share every discovery and ask why about everything, now shrank away from questions and hid his test scores. Teachers reported that he fidgeted constantly, stared out windows, and refused to focus during lessons. Grayson Academy, where tuition cost $45,000 per year, was threatening expulsion if Marcus didn't show improvement soon. "We have standards to maintain," Headmaster Dr. Pemberton had explained during their last meeting. Perhaps Marcus would be better suited to a school with different expectations. Michael had thrown money at the problem, hiring the most expensive private tutors in Manhattan. Surely expertise and credentials could unlock whatever was blocking his son's learning. Dr. Jonathan Whitmore arrived with impressive credentials, Harvard PhD in education, 20 years of experience tutoring Manhattan's elite children, and a reputation for turning around difficult cases. At $200 per hour, he commanded the highest rates in the city. "Marcus requires structured intervention," Dr. Whitmore declared after his assessment. "Flashcards for sight words, time math drills, rigorous test preparation. We must address these deficits systematically." For 6 weeks, Marcus sat through sessions that felt more like military training than learning. Flashcards flipped relentlessly as Dr. Whitmore demanded faster responses. Math drills timed to the second. reading passages followed by comprehension questions that felt like interrogations. Marcus grew increasingly withdrawn. He would stare blankly at the materials, fidget with anything within reach, and shut down completely after 30 minutes. When Dr. Whitmore raised his voice to demand attention, Marcus would flinch as if struck. "This child has severe cognitive processing delays," Dr. Whitmore announced to Michael. "After 6 frustrated weeks, I recommend specialized residential programs. Marcus may never achieve grade-level academics." Mrs. Elizabeth Sterling came next, a former Exeter Academy instructor who charged $150 per hour and brought the classical education methods that built America's finest minds. Her approach centered on memorization, Latin roots and literature that she insisted would elevate Marcus's intellectual capacity. "Children rise to expectations," Mrs. Sterling proclaimed, assigning Marcus vocabulary lists meant for high school students and passages from Shakespeare. "We mustn't coddle intellectual weakness." 8 weeks of this approach left Marcus more anxious than ever. He would mechanically recite Latin roots without understanding, his eyes glazed with confusion and defeat. The complexity overwhelmed him, and Mrs. Sterling's disapproval grew more obvious each session. "Marcus lacks the intellectual capacity for advanced academics," she finally told Michael. "Perhaps trade school preparation would be more appropriate than college preparatory education." The third attempt came with Dr. Patricia Chen, a learning disability specialist with a PhD and a practice focused on deficit remediation. She arrived with computer programs, brain training games, and cognitive exercises designed to repair processing deficits. "We'll target his specific weaknesses," Dr. Chen explained, setting up expensive software that looked more like medical equipment than educational tools. "These evidence-based interventions will strengthen his neural pathways." For 10 weeks, Marcus completed computerized tasks that felt like punishment. Match shapes quickly, remember number sequences, identify patterns under time pressure. He performed the exercises mechanically, without joy or understanding, like a patient enduring treatment for a disease. "Severe processing deficits," Dr. Chen concluded after extensive data collection. "I recommend medication evaluation and significantly lowered academic expectations. Some children simply cannot achieve traditional academic success." 3 experts, 3 failures, 3 more confirmations that his brilliant little boy was somehow broken. Michael sat in his empty penthouse surrounded by expensive tutoring materials and deficit-focused reports, watching Marcus arrange his Lego blocks into intricate patterns while humming softly to himself. How could a child who created such detailed, complex structures be incapable of learning? The school's ultimatum loomed: show improvement or face expulsion. The experts had given up. Traditional education seemed impossible for his son. In desperation, Michael reached out to Dr. Maria Rodriguez, director of a community center where his company donated annually. "I don't know what else to try," he admitted. "Everyone says Marcus can't learn." "Every child can learn," Dr. Rodriguez replied gently. "They just need someone who understands how their particular mind works. I know someone who might help, but she's not what you'd expect." Keisha Washington arrived at the Patterson penthouse on a Tuesday afternoon carrying a worn canvas bag and the warmest smile Michael had seen in months. At 38, she had the kind of presence that immediately put people at ease: intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses, a gentle voice, and an unhurried way of moving that suggested infinite patience. "Mr. Patterson," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Keisha. I'm here to meet Marcus and learn about what makes him special." Michael led her through the elegant hallways lined with family photos from happier times, explaining the litany of failures they'd endured. 3 different tutors have given up. The school psychologist says he has severe learning disabilities. I'm starting to think maybe they're right. Keisha listened without judgment, occasionally asking gentle questions that surprised Michael with their focus. What does Marcus love to build with his Legos? What kinds of stories does he make up when he plays? What does he wonder about when you're driving together? Michael realized with growing shame that he didn't know the answers. Somewhere between work demands and tutoring sessions, he'd stopped paying attention to his son's natural interests. When they reached Marcus's room, they found the boy building an elaborate structure, with blocks completely absorbed in his creation. He looked up warily when they entered. Experience had taught him that adults usually meant more lessons, more failure, more disappointment. "Hi, Marcus," Keisha said, settling cross-legged on the floor near his building project. "That looks like an amazing city. Can you tell me about it?" Marcus studied her suspiciously. "Are you another teacher?" "I'm a librarian," Keisha replied. "I help people find books they love. What you're building reminds me of some fascinating cities I've read about. Is this one on Earth, or maybe another planet?" Something in her tone, curious rather than testing, interested rather than evaluating, made Marcus relax slightly. "It's a space station," he said quietly. "The dinosaurs live here now because their planet got too cold." Dinosaurs in space. Keisha's eyes lit up with genuine fascination. "That's brilliant. How do they breathe? Do they have special spacesuits?" For the next 20 minutes, Marcus explained his complex world in detail. The dinosaurs had learned space travel. The station had different sections for different species. The flying dinosaurs delivered messages between levels. As he talked, his confidence grew. His eyes brightened, and his hands gestured animatedly. Michael watched in amazement. This was the son he remembered, creative, thoughtful, full of imagination and logic that made perfect sense in its own context. "Marcus," Keisha said, when his explanation wound down, "you have one of the most interesting minds I've ever met. Would you like to find some books about dinosaurs in space? I know some amazing stories you might enjoy." "I can't read very good," Marcus said, his brightness dimming. "The words get all mixed up." "Different people's brains work differently," Keisha replied matter-of-factly. "Some people are great at reading little black marks on white paper. Other people, like you, are great at building complex worlds and understanding how things work together. Both kinds of thinking are important." She opened her canvas bag and pulled out a colorful book about paleontology, filled with detailed illustrations and diagrams. "Want to look at this together? We don't have to read every word. We can explore the pictures and see what interests you." Marcus moved closer, drawn by the vibrant images of dinosaur skeletons and fossil discoveries. Keisha didn't drill him on sight words or test his comprehension. Instead, she followed his natural curiosity, reading passages aloud when he pointed to something intriguing, pausing to let him study diagrams that caught his attention. "How do scientists know what dinosaurs look like if they only have bones?" Marcus asked, pointing to a reconstruction illustration. "That's exactly what real paleontologists wonder about," Keisha said. "They're like detectives using clues to solve mysteries, just like you're doing when you figure out how your space station should work." Over the following weeks, Keisha established a learning routine that felt nothing like the torturous tutoring sessions Marcus had endured. They met in the comfortable reading nook by his bedroom window, surrounded by soft cushions and natural light. Fidget tools were always available. Stress balls, textured objects, small puzzles he could manipulate while thinking. Instead of forcing Marcus to sit still for hour-long sessions, Keisha built in movement breaks every 15 minutes. They would walk around the room while discussing story characters, act out scenes with dramatic voices, or build models related to what they were reading. Most importantly, Keisha started with Marcus's passions instead of curriculum requirements. He was obsessed with dinosaurs and space, so they explored those topics through books, videos, and hands-on activities. Math became calculating the size of sauropods and the distance to Mars. Reading happened naturally, as Marcus wanted to know more about his favorite subjects. "Traditional teaching tries to pour information into children's heads," Keisha explained to Michael one evening. "But real learning happens when children pull information toward themselves because they're genuinely curious." She showed Marcus that he could draw story maps and character sketches to help organize his thoughts. When reading felt overwhelming, they would take turns, Keisha reading a paragraph aloud while Marcus followed along. Then Marcus attempting the next section with support. Writing became creative storytelling about dinosaur adventures rather than boring worksheets. Marcus dictated elaborate tales while Keisha wrote them down, then worked together to illustrate the stories with detailed drawings that showed his incredible visual intelligence. I don't understand, Michael confided to Keisha after watching one of their sessions. The experts all said Marcus couldn't focus, but he just spent 45 minutes completely absorbed in that book about fossils. Marcus can focus beautifully, Keisha replied. He just can't focus on things that don't make sense to his way of thinking. His brain needs movement, visual input, and connection to his interests. When we honor how his mind works instead of fighting it, he's incredibly capable. The breakthrough signs were subtle but unmistakable. By week 2, Marcus stopped asking how much longer during their sessions. By week 3, he was requesting specific books about his favorite topics. Week 4 brought the first time he stayed after a session ended because he wanted to finish an interesting chapter. By week 5, Marcus was drawing detailed pictures of story characters at home, extending their learning beyond formal session time. Week 6 brought the moment that made Michael's heart soar, Marcus asking Keisha to read just one more page when their time was officially up. "You know what I realized?" Marcus told his father one evening as they sat together looking at a book about space exploration. "I'm not stupid. My brain just works like a scientist's brain." Ms. Keisha showed me that's actually pretty cool. Michael watched his son's confidence slowly return and felt a mixture of gratitude and regret. Gratitude for Keisha's wisdom and patience. Regret that it had taken so long to find someone who saw Marcus's gifts instead of focusing on his struggles. But even as progress accelerated, storm clouds were gathering. The school's patience was wearing thin, and Michael found himself caught between Keisha's gentle optimism and the harsh reality of institutional expectations that seemed determined to label his son as a failure. The emergency meeting at Grayson Academy felt like a tribunal. Headmaster Dr. Pemberton sat behind his imposing mahogany desk, flanked by Marcus's teacher, the school psychologist, and the academic dean. Their faces wore expressions of polite concern that barely masked their frustration. "Mr. Patterson," Dr. Pemberton began adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "We've been more than patient with Marcus's situation. However, after extensive intervention and 3 different tutoring attempts, we see no meaningful improvement in his academic performance." Marcus's latest test scores were spread across the desk like evidence in a court case. Math, 23%. Reading comprehension, 31%. Science, 18%. The numbers felt like physical blows to Michael's chest. "Marcus continues to disrupt classroom instruction," added Mrs. Blackwood, his teacher. "He can't sit still, refuses to participate in group reading, and seems incapable of following basic directions. Frankly, he's preventing other children from learning." The school psychologist leaned forward with practiced sympathy. "We strongly recommend medication for ADHD and placement in a specialized school for learning disabled children. Marcus simply isn't equipped for our academic standards. Your son needs intensive intervention," Dr. Pemberton concluded. "If you're not willing to pursue appropriate treatment, we'll be forced to recommend his withdrawal from Grayson Academy. We have a reputation to maintain." Michael felt the familiar weight of failure crushing down on him. 3 expensive tutors had quit. The most elite school in Manhattan was ready to expel his son. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe Marcus truly was beyond help. That evening he called Keisha with the news, his voice heavy with defeat. "Maybe I've been fooling myself. Maybe the experts know something you don't. Marcus is still failing every test, still disrupting class. The school wants him on medication or gone." Keisha's response was quiet but firm. "Mr. Patterson, Marcus isn't broken. Your system is broken for children like him. Those tests don't measure intelligence, they measure conformity to a single narrow way of thinking." "But he's failing everything," Michael protested. "How can I ignore that reality? He reads dinosaur encyclopedias for fun now," Keisha replied. "He solves complex spatial problems with his building projects. He creates detailed logical narratives about imaginary worlds. How is that learning disabled?" The conversation was interrupted by a small voice from the doorway. Marcus stood in his pajamas, tears streaming down his face. He'd heard enough to understand that adults were discussing his problems again. "Am I really stupid like they say, Daddy?" Marcus whispered, his voice breaking Michael's heart. "Is that why you're always sad when you look at me?" Keisha knelt down to Marcus's eye level, her voice gentle but certain. "Marcus, let me tell you about a boy who couldn't read until he was 10 years old. Teachers thought he was slow. Other kids made fun of him. Everyone said he'd never amount to anything." Marcus wiped his nose with his sleeve. "What happened to him?" "He became one of the world's most famous paleontologists," Keisha said. "Dr. Jack Horner discovered some of the most important dinosaur fossils ever found. But school was torture for him because his brain worked differently than what teachers expected." "Really? Really? Different brains see different possibilities, Marcus. Your brain works like a scientist's brain, like an explorer's brain, like an inventor's brain. That's not broken, that's wonderful." The next day, Keisha made an unusual request. "Mr. Patterson, I want you to observe one of our regular sessions. Don't say anything, just watch Marcus learn." Michael settled into a corner chair as Keisha and Marcus began their usual routine. She'd brought new books about space exploration, and Marcus's eyes immediately lit up with interest. "Did you know that Jupiter has 79 moons?" Marcus said, pointing to a detailed diagram. "And some of them might have oceans under their ice." "Show me how you figured that out," Keisha encouraged. For the next hour, Michael watched his son demonstrate incredible knowledge and reasoning skills. Marcus calculated the relative sizes of planets using mathematical concepts that should have been beyond his grade level. He read complex scientific vocabulary with perfect comprehension when the subject interested him. He explained theories about space exploration with logical reasoning and creative problem solving. "Daddy, did you see?" Marcus looked up from his book with shining eyes. "I read this whole chapter about Europa. Ms. Keisha says I'm reading like a fifth grader now." Michael stared at his son in amazement. This confident, articulate, intellectually curious child bore no resemblance to the learning disabled boy described in school reports. Marcus wasn't failing to learn, he was learning brilliantly when teaching matched his natural abilities. "I don't need to be fixed, Daddy," Marcus said, climbing into his father's lap. "I just needed better books and someone who understands how my brain works." In that moment, Michael finally understood what Keisha had been trying to tell him. Marcus wasn't the problem. The system that demanded conformity over creativity, that valued compliance over curiosity, that measured intelligence through a single narrow lens, that was the problem. His son wasn't broken. He was magnificent. 6 months later, Michael sat in a very different kind of school meeting. Riverside Progressive Academy buzzed with the energy of children engaged in learning that honored their diverse minds and learning styles. The walls displayed student projects that celebrated creativity alongside academic achievement. Science experiments, artistic interpretations of literature, collaborative research presentations. "Marcus has flourished beyond our highest expectations," smiled Ms. Chen, his new teacher. "His reading level has jumped 2 full grades this semester, and his mathematical reasoning skills are remarkable. More importantly, he loves coming to school." The transformation had been remarkable, but not surprising to those who understood Marcus's true potential. When removed from the rigid constraints of traditional education and placed in an environment that valued different types of intelligence, he had bloomed like a flower, finally given proper sunlight. At Riverside, Marcus could move while learning, pursue his passions as pathways to required skills, and demonstrate knowledge through multiple formats rather than just standardized tests. Teachers were trained in recognizing different learning styles and adapting instruction rather than expecting all children to learn identically. Yesterday, Marcus spent lunch period teaching younger students about the solar system. Ms. Chen continued, "He's become our resident expert on paleontology, and other children come to him with questions about science. His confidence in himself as a learner has transformed completely." At home, the evening homework battles had been replaced by enthusiastic learning conversations. Marcus would bound through the door each afternoon, eager to share new discoveries and interesting questions that had emerged during class discussions. "Daddy, did you know that some dinosaurs were actually covered in feathers?" Marcus would announce, spreading his books across the kitchen table. "I'm writing a story about a feathered T-Rex who learns to fly." The child who had once believed he was stupid now saw himself as a scientist, an explorer, a storyteller. Reading had become a gateway to adventure rather than a source of shame. Math made sense when connected to real problems he wanted to solve. Keisha continued as Marcus's learning mentor and had become a treasured part of their family. She helped Michael understand that parenting a child with different learning needs wasn't about fixing deficits, it was about nurturing gifts and building bridges between a child's natural abilities and the skills they needed to succeed. Every child is brilliant. Keisha often reminded Michael during their weekly check-ins. Some children's brilliance just shines in ways our traditional systems haven't learned to recognize yet. Marcus had started a small tutoring group for other children with learning differences, sharing the strategies that had helped him discover his own intelligence. "Your brain isn't broken," he would tell frustrated younger students. "It just works in a special way, and we need to find the right books for your kind of smart." Michael watched his son's transformation with profound gratitude and deep regret for the months of struggle they'd endured. The most expensive tutors in Manhattan had focused on what Marcus couldn't do rather than building on what he could do brilliantly. They had seen deficits to remediate rather than gifts to cultivate. Keisha had seen a different child entirely, one whose mind worked like a scientist's, whose curiosity was boundless when properly nurtured, whose learning differences were actually learning strengths, waiting to be recognized and developed. The journey had taught Michael that true education isn't about forcing conformity to arbitrary standards. It's about understanding each child's unique way of engaging with the world and creating learning experiences that honor and develop their natural abilities. Marcus's story wasn't just about overcoming learning disabilities. It was about a society learning to recognize and celebrate the many different ways that intelligence can manifest. It was about the difference between seeing children as problems to be fixed and seeing them as individuals to be understood and nurtured. If Marcus's story touched your heart and you'd like to hear more inspiring stories about children whose potential was unlocked by someone who truly believed in them, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Every week I share stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things that remind us to see the gifts in every child. Which moment resonated with you most? Was it Keisha's gentle assessment that focused on Marcus's strengths rather than his struggles? The breakthrough. When Marcus realized he was a different kind of smart, Michael's recognition of his son's true potential, or the beautiful transformation of their family's relationship with learning. Share in the comments below. I read every single one and love hearing how these stories inspire you to see children's unique gifts differently. Sometimes the most profound educational breakthroughs come not from expensive tutors with impressive credentials or cutting-edge learning technology, but from someone who takes the time to understand how a child's unique mind works and meets them there with patience, creativity, and unshakable belief in their potential. Every child is brilliant. Some children's brilliance just shines in ways our traditional systems haven't learned to recognize yet.